He hit me once. What disturbed me afterwards was not only that he had hit me, it was that he showed no remorse. This was someone who had always told me he would never hit a woman. But when it happened, there was no deep regret, no moment where I felt he truly understood what he had done, no conversation where he took full responsibility. And that confused me. Because I had always imagined that if someone loved you, they would be devastated by the thought of hurting you. Instead, life simply carried on, and somehow so did I. I still wanted to stay because I wanted to be a married woman, come rain, come shine. I had built an idea in my mind of what marriage meant, and in that idea, staying meant strength. Leaving felt like failure. I had endured so much already, and I kept thinking perhaps things would change. Perhaps this was a one off. Perhaps love means giving another chance. When I look back now, I realize I wasn't just protecting the marriage. I was protecting the dream I had attached to it. Sometimes we fight harder for the picture we created in our minds than for the reality we are actually living. I wasn't asking, is this relationship healthy? I was asking, how do I keep this marriage alive? Those are two very different questions. One focuses on the relationship, the other focuses only on keeping the title. One of the hardest lessons I have learned is that we must be very careful about the thing we call endurance. Endurance is often praised. We are told to persevere, to keep believing, to keep fighting. And those are good qualities only when they are directed towards something healthy. But endurance without boundaries can slowly become permission, and permission for behavior that should never become normal, permission for disrespect, for emotional harm, permission for fear to quietly settle into everyday life. A boundary is simply a limit that protects your well being, your dignity, and your safety. I didn't understand that then. I thought commitment meant having no limits. I thought a good wife endured everything. I thought wanting something to work was enough to make it work. It wasn't. Over the years, I've listened to many women tell similar stories. Not identical stories, but similar patterns. Many described making excuses because they desperately wanted to believe the behavior was temporary. Some hoped marriage would change the person. Others believed children would bring the family closer. Some convinced themselves that because the abuse wasn't happening every day, perhaps it wasn't really abuse. Others stayed because they feared shame, loneliness, financial uncertainty, or what people would say if the marriage ended. What strikes me is that these women weren't weak. Most of them were incredibly strong. They were resilient. They were loyal, hopeful. The problem wasn't that they lacked strength, was that all of that strength was being poured into surviving instead of healing. Strength is a beautiful quality, but strength also needs wisdom. Sometimes wisdom asks difficult questions. What behavior have I started calling normal? What have I stopped questioning simply because it's become familiar? Have I confused commitment with silence? Have I mistaken fear for faithfulness? Today, I'm not sharing this story to tell another woman what decision she must make because every situation is different, every family is different. Every person must make decisions based on their own circumstances, safety, and support. I'm sharing this because I want you to pause and ask yourself one honest question. What have you normalized simply because you desperately wanted something to work? Especially if you're young and you're noticing warning signs early, please don't assume that time automatically changes harmful behavior. Pay attention. Don't ignore patterns simply because the good days are easier to remember than the painful ones. Speak to someone you trust. Seek wise counsel and never confuse having boundaries with failing at love. Healthy love doesn't ask you to surrender your dignity. It doesn't ask you to abandon your sense of safety. It does not ask you to silence your own pain. One of the reasons I wrote Recycled and Repurposed was because I realized that stories have the power to eliminate paths we could see while we were walking through them. Sometimes another person's reflection helps us recognize patterns in our lives. Sometimes it gives language to experiences we've never been able to explain. Sometimes it simply reminds us that we are not alone. I can't change my past, but I can choose what I do with what it taught me. If sharing these experiences encourage someone to ask better questions, seek help earlier, or recognize their own worth before years have passed, then the pain has not been wasted. I am Comfort Convo, founder of Rise Above All Odds. I share my story not to keep reopening old wounds, but to show that healing can produce wisdom, and wisdom is most valuable when it is shared. If this conversation has encouraged you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who may need to hear it. And remember, healing doesn't begin when life becomes perfect. It begins when we become honest. Begin again. We rise quietly.